Now let us see what happens to the gases which are breathed in and expired out inside the body. That means we are going to deal with exchange of gases inside the body during this lesson. Now while discussing exchange of gases, you know that the tissues which are doing respiration, they would need oxygen and they would produce carbon dioxide as a result of respiratory metabolic process, and the oxygen is taken up from the air while the carbon dioxide is given outside. That is very basic thing we have read till now. Now we are going to see what happens when the air is inspired in, if it is stored inside the alveoli, how it would be exchanged, what would be the basic force which is responsible for exchange of the gases. So first of all, let's see what is the site of exchange. The primary site of exchange of gases is alveoli, which we said that they are exchange part, as the name suggests in their case. They are the exchange part. So the exchange of oxygen or carbon dioxide which is to be thrown out or taken inside. In case of oxygen, it would be taken inside. In case of carbon dioxide, the air would be thrown out. So that site happens to be alveoli, and of course there is exchange of gases which takes place at tissues between blood. Okay, blood and tissues, they also undergo exchange of gas, and these are the sites of exchange of gases, both carbon dioxide and oxygen. Now what is the force which is responsible, what is the basic physical mechanism which is responsible for this exchange is simple diffusion. Now in the process of diffusion, you have known that diffusion basically is the movement of the particles from their higher concentration to lower concentration. There is a gradient which is being formed, a concentration gradient is present, and then there is movement of the higher concentration particles to their presence in the lower concentration. They move towards their lower concentration, and that process is known as diffusion. Now in case of exchange of gases, you know that air contains different amounts of gases and each gas has its own partial pressure. Now what is this partial pressure? Supposedly you have contained the air inside a container. Each particle of the air would be exerting some sort of pressure on the container's walls, and that each gas would be contributing into the total pressure exerted by the gas. So the pressure exerted by individual gas happens to be its partial pressure, and it is the partial pressure of the individual gas, both partial pressure of carbon dioxide and oxygen, which play an important role in creating a gradient so that simple diffusion across the membranes takes place. Because it is a living system we are talking about, there would be a membrane which would be present, because there would be exchange taking place between the cells or the tissues, of course. So there would be a membrane that would be present, and according to the partial pressure gradient that would be existent over there, the gaseous diffusion would take place. Now we are concerned primarily with diffusion of carbon dioxide and oxygen, so we would deal with the partial pressures of carbon dioxide and oxygen only. And what are the factors which are affecting this simple diffusion process? First one is the solubility of gases, and the second one is the thickness of membranes. We are going to take each one individually. Let's talk about solubility of gases. Now because our prime concern is with these two gases, leaving aside all the other gases, they would be thrown out as it is in the form of air. This is the main gaseous exchange that has to take place. So we are going to see the solubility of these two gases. You know that carbon dioxide has a higher solubility in terms of its solubility in various substances like blood has more solubility. It is 20 to 25 times higher than that of oxygen. So the solubility of carbon dioxide is much higher than that of oxygen. How much higher? It is 20 to 25 times, and hence the diffusion of carbon dioxide across the membranes would be favored as compared to that of oxygen. So oxygen lags behind in terms of solubility of gases because the carbon dioxide solubility is much higher. So it would be easier for carbon dioxide to diffuse across the membrane as compared to that of oxygen. And secondly, we talk about the thickness of membranes. Now over here we are going to consider that the membranes which are going to be involved in the exchange of gases. Now you know that the primary site that we discussed was alveoli. So let us see what alveoli would be all about. Supposedly this is an alveoli. It is alveolar sac, and you know that it is made up of squamous epithelium. It is the tissue. So the squamous epithelium has nothing else but a wreath of cells, very thin cells, which act like a very thin membrane. This is the alveoli. Okay, the squamous epithelium, single layer. So the thickness has to be very less in order to enable gaseous exchange, smooth gaseous exchange. Then there is a basement membrane which is present. It is non-cellular. This basement membrane is present. And then there is membrane of capillaries. That is also, we know that the blood vessels in case of capillaries are having again squamous epithelium as their surface tissue. This happens to be the capillary, and this again is single layered celled capillary, as you can see over here. This is the capillary, this is the alveoli. So as you can see, our body has taken care of the thickness factor by keeping a very thin surface for exchange. So this area basically is the area of exchange, and the thickness is lesser than 1 millimeter. So it is easier for the gases to diffuse across the alveolar sacs, and the exchange of gases takes place. This is also squamous epithelium, thin layered. There is a non-cellular basement membrane which is present between the two membranes, and there is alveoli. So the air comes over here. According to its partial pressure, it gets diffused into the capillaries. So when we understand this point, now we come to the actual exchange process which takes place. We have a system of circulation that is responsible for bringing about the exchange at both alveolar and tissue level. As you know, this entire process of negative pressure breathing is conducted just in order to provide tissues with oxygen. So let us consider we have tissues over here. This is the area where tissues are present. It is supplied by blood through systemic circulation. Now this happens to be the heart. Just easiest representation I am trying to give you. This heart gives out oxygenated blood to the tissues. Let me use red color for oxygenated so that you get an idea that it is coming from arteries. This heart gives out oxygenated blood to the tissues. Wait a minute, we need to make it little more accessible so that we can represent lungs as well. So there is oxygenated blood which is coming from the heart. These are the ventricles I have represented over here. These would be the auricles of the heart. From the ventricles there is coming oxygenated blood to the tissues. It is bringing oxygen, alright. From the tissues there goes deoxygenated blood to the heart. That means it is rich in carbon dioxide, alright. This is systemic circulation which is taking place. These are systemic arteries, okay. Now heart is not gifted with anything which can exchange oxygen, so we are dependent on lungs for that exchange. Now from heart, this deoxygenated blood goes to the lungs, okay, these are lungs over here. It goes to the lungs, it gets oxygenated, comes back to the heart through pulmonary circulation. So as you can see, it is basically the lungs which are taking care of the oxygenation and deoxygenation. So the exchange first of all takes place in lungs, and that is known as pulmonary circulation. Over this area where the tissues are taking important role, as in the case of lungs, the exchange site happens to be tissues, that is systemic circulation. Now what happens at lungs is that the partial pressure of oxygen is 104 millimeter of mercury, okay, and partial pressure of carbon dioxide happens to be 40 mm, okay. Now this is inside lungs. That means inside alveoli. We had talked about that the pressure difference would be responsible for exchange of gases. So this is what is the partial pressure of each gas in the alveoli. Comparatively, the deoxygenated blood that comes to the hearts have that comes to the lungs by the agency of heart has partial pressure of oxygen as less as 40 millimeter of mercury, as less as this much, and partial pressure of carbon dioxide is 45 millimeter of mercury. Now you can see the difference, that the deoxygenated blood that is coming to the heart is having this much difference, this much partial pressure, and in case of alveoli, the air that we have inhaled in is having this difference. So automatically, by any means, the carbon dioxide having higher partial pressure would move into the lungs alveoli, and oxygen which is having higher partial pressure inside the alveoli would move into the arteries, or whatever the circulation is, pulmonary circulatory path it would come, it would move into the blood. When it moves into the blood, the partial pressure of oxygen inside the oxygenated blood becomes 95 millimeter of mercury. And the partial pressure of carbon dioxide, because 5 of it has gone there, it reduces to 40 millimeter of mercury. Okay, this is what happens to the deoxygenated blood condition. Alright, now the tissues being deficient, tissues again having 40 and 45, same thing is happening. They come over here, and yes, it comes like this, 95 millimeter, 40 millimeter, they would come to the tissues. The 95 millimeter of mercury would automatically, this pressure gradient would automatically, oxygen would move inside the tissues, and carbon dioxide would be given back to the deoxygenated blood. It would make the blood deoxygenated, and it would be going back to 45, and the oxygen over here would be reduced. Okay, it came as it was having this much partial pressure to the tissues because the oxygen got diffused into the tissues, carbon dioxide got diffused into the arteries, and it takes back into the veins, in fact into the capillaries, I would use the word. It takes back the carbon dioxide to the heart, from where it pumps back to the lungs. This gradient is being formed, and then the exchange of gases takes place at the alveoli. Again, there is a gradient, similar sort of gradient present inside the tissues, and then again there is exchange of oxygen gets into the tissues, and carbon dioxide being at higher concentration as compared to that in the oxygenated blood. Again, the carbon dioxide gets diffused, and it increases the concentration of the carbon dioxide, so this circulation takes place. Upper one is the pulmonary circulation, because the lungs are involved, alveoli are involved in the exchange, and the lower one is the systemic circulation, where the tissues are involved, which are the site of exchange of gases. And how that exchange takes place? It takes place by the agency of the diffusion process, that is due to the partial pressure of gas. And as the partial pressure varies, you can see over here in the deoxygenated and oxygenated blood, the difference takes place, the diffusion process takes place. Then it happens to be changing in the tissues case, and from the tissues again the exchange happens, it goes back to the heart, from where it is pumped to the lungs, so that it gets oxygenated again. So this entire process takes place, and the exchange of gases, as we have seen, is totally dependent upon the partial pressure and the solubility of gases, because as you can see over here, the pressure difference is not as great as in the case of oxygen for carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is having lesser gradient, yet it gets diffused at a faster rate, and oxygen having a higher gradient is still not at par with carbon dioxide, because the solubility of gases also has an important role to play.